Weird how long it's... Okay. Hey, and welcome to a debate show without an interesting name. We are here with special guest Martin Wagner and a few other people. We're about to go around and introduce ourselves. Yeah, we have a Q&A thing. If you go to the if you click through to the Google event page, you can ask us questions, and I'll transfer them on to any members of the panel. For now, does anyone have anything? Martin, would you like to introduce yourself, and then we'll just go around.
Yeah, because actually I haven't really met anybody. So, well, as you said, I'm Martin. I'm with the Atheist Experience show out of Austin, Texas. And I have been a host/co-host participant in the show since '99, I think. So, good long while. And it has been an interesting little road to travel. It's been very informative, very educational. I've met a lot of good friends, learned a great many things, and you know, I feel very proud to have been a part of it. It's nice to see how it has been appreciated now. So many people from pretty much everywhere. So thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no, thank you for coming on. Kyle, would you like to introduce yourself real fast too?
Yeah, I'm Kyle. I'm out of East Texas. And,
Oh yeah,
I've been for right about 3 years, and yeah, that's
cool.
About it.
Thank you. And I'm gonna have to ask you guys keep yourself muted when you're not speaking, so we don't get feedback. Is that cool? I'll do the same. And Kayla, you can go ahead and introduce yourself too.
Hi everybody. I'm Kayla. I'm a painter, and yes, I'm also an atheist. I've been one for a few years, and you know, haven't done anything super special, but I'm here. I'm happy to be here.
Cool. Charles, you've been on a bunch, but go ahead and introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, I'm Charles. I'm a Presbyterian minister. Grew up in Texas, but I live in Colorado now. So, yeah.
Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and launch into the first discussion topic that I wanted to address. The question is, and I'm going to ask the atheists first because I assume they'll have less predictable responses. Does religion have a positive impact on the world as a whole and on mankind? Martin, what do you think?
I'm actually kind of glad you started with this because, you know, I do know, to be fair, you know, quite a number of atheists who have a really nasty knee-jerk reaction to that one. Oh, it's just this horrible scourge. And, you know, look, if religion had nothing at all to recommend it, you know, we wouldn't have had it for several millennia, right? So I do think that there have been things, that there are things that I think are kind of basic to the human experience that religious community, for example, does address. Even, you know, if you don't understand, or if you don't believe, shall we say, the supernatural claims of a religion, you can still acknowledge, for example, that one thing religion helps people do, has helped people do, is manage some very basic insecurities and fears about life, right? You know, particularly, well, what do we do? What happens when we die? You know, what is it all about? You know, when we see ourselves against the vastness of the cosmos and feel very insignificant. You know, now I'm not saying that religion does that by giving, you know, accurate answers, but it manages. I think it has managed to allow people at least to not be afraid of things that they would otherwise be afraid of. So in that sense, you know, I think, you know, there's a function that religion has had, and also today there is the community aspect that is forged, for example, by churches. You know, so I think that there are at an individual level, at a personal level, you know, valuable functions that religion serves. Now, in terms of religion actually being, I think, offering legitimate answers to the big questions about life, and in terms of the confusion that a lot of people have between, you know, religion's answers and the answers provided to us by science, and why we understand and accept the one and not the other. You know, I don't think that you know, religion has contributed, or at least especially today, is contributing as positively as it could in that arena. I mean, when you've got guys like, you know, when you have two really extremist figures, Ken Ham and Pat Robertson on the one hand, and calling each other not good enough Christians because one believes that the Earth is 6,000 years old and the other doesn't. You begin to see how ridiculous religion can be when it tries to tip its nose, into, for example, into arenas where I don't think it's it really has anything to offer, such as science. But yeah, I think that on a personal level, when people ask me about my growing up experiences and growing up among a church-going family, and my parents are Episcopal, but when I was a boy, we went to a big Baptist church, and I would do the church youth group things and enjoyed them a great deal. I told people, no, I have no negative, and in fact, mostly very pleasant experiences of growing up in that church and doing stuff and kind of being part of a group. But that really had no bearing on my decision to reject the supernatural claims of religion. I can still say, yes, I had a great deal of fun going to camp and doing this and doing that. But that is, I think, pretty much where it stops for me. There's a personal sense of community and a way in which you can sort of manage your fears, manage things that you don't understand. But that's about it. I think on a personal level, religion can be said to have positive influence.
Kyle, what would you agree or disagree with that analysis, and what's your own view?
Okay, for the most part, I kind of forgot to get into some of my background. My parents used to be Jehovah's Witnesses when they were much younger, and they had some fallings out. There was a lot of bad stuff that kind of happened, so they almost got excommunicated by their family. So growing up, I wasn't actually in a church with organized religion, and I still managed to find a lot of outlets that were kind of religious, like with card leagues and things like that. So I feel like a lot of the things that people associate as being positive with religion also manifest even if you don't really have religion. So I'm not really sure if a lot of the positive things ascribed to it are always about religion itself, or if it's just our natural social behaviors. Mm-hmm. But as far as like art and things like that go, I definitely feel like it's had a lot of positive contributions to that. So for the most part.
As a Christian, I am also a Christian, and my question is, do you think that whether or not religion plays a positive impact in the world should personally, do you believe your personal belief is having a positive impact in the world, and your religion particularly? I guess is what I'm going at.
Yes, definitely. The primary problem, I feel like a lot of people focus more on religious rituals or restrictions and things like that, whereas really where you're going to get your most benefit is actually personally knowing God, actually knowing who Jesus is personally, as opposed to going to church or doing good things like that. So really your primary benefit you're going to get with that, you're going to get it, you actually know who God is, but I don't really feel like that's traditionally what people think or see when they think of religion being beneficial. I don't know if that answers the question however you were wanting it.
It did. Thank you. Kayla, what do you think?
Okay, so think about the impact of religion overall, like if it has a positive impact.
Yes.
I think things like religion are so easily manipulated by a person's will that it's hard to say. I mean, it has positive and negative effects depending on the person. I can't say that religion in itself is necessarily good or bad. I do think it helps people to base their beliefs on a foundation that isn't founded in reality. I mean, that's a negative impact, but it also does help people, like, personally. I just, it's so manipulated by who the person themselves is that it's hard for me to say that it has a negative or a positive influence.
Cool. That makes sense. Charles, what do you think?
I can't. I don't know that I can say a whole lot that hasn't been said already. Honestly, I was expecting rants and tirades, I would add, I think on a personal level, religion gives people hope, and which some would consider that a crutch. I wouldn't. I think we all find hope in different things. I think religion is beneficial because it gives hope, and I think it encourages us to be at our best. On top of that, on a wider social level, historically speaking, religious institutions have been the one providing free education. Religious institutions have been the ones taking care of the poor and the widows. I live in a small town, and it's a very poor town because there are very few jobs left. But people know that if they need help with groceries, or if they need help paying their gas bill, they can come to the church and we'll help them and not expect anything of them. So I think religion has broader positive social implications. With regard to science, I think religion should refrain from making any comments on science, except to say, well, this is how we best understand the world. How can we incorporate that into what we as people of faith believe? So, yeah, I think that's all I have to say on it.
For the atheists in the panel, if you met a person and you reached the conclusion that they would benefit greatly from being, say, a Christian or a Muslim, in their personal life, there's something going on with them that you have reached the conclusion that they would live a happier and more fulfilling existence, that particular person, if they were a member of this other religion, would you do something to attempt to convert them to that religion?
Are you asking us, the atheists?
I am asking you.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, I have to be perfectly honest and say that, speaking as an atheist, I don't see any circumstance where I would encounter a person who perhaps had some particular issue or strife or unhappiness in their own life, or whatever situation that they were in, where I would come to the conclusion that that they're adopting a religion would be the solution to it. If for example the common, it would depend on what it is, right? And even then, for example, if you encountered a suicidal person or a depressed person, or someone suffering from some sort of, I don't know, perhaps they're bipolar, perhaps they or they're homeless, they've been thrown out by their family or something like that. There's always some sort of service that can, for example, or some sort of medical perhaps condition that they might have. I don't really see any circumstance where I would say, well, go to this church or this synagogue or this mosque, unless, of course, it were a circumstance like we just heard about, where, if you have a poor person and the church happens to be where the food bank is, sure, go there. But I don't know that I can't imagine any situation where I would say, if only you adopted a belief in a supernatural deity, your problems would be resolved. So, I can't really think of a situation where that would be the appropriate answer to a person's problems. Problems tend to be, they're real world things. They're things that we really suffer from and face, and they require those kinds of hands-on solutions. And as I said before, even when you accept the fact that churches, for example, not necessarily the religious belief of the churches, but churches themselves, or religious gatherings, religious institutions, can provide people with a sense of belonging to a community, and that can't be discounted as a benefit. The way to handle very serious, immediate problems that are impacting someone's life is to focus on those problems and come up with practical solutions. If perhaps if a person were religious and they were in the midst of, say, going through, lengthy unemployment or divorce or dealing with depression or anything else that was negatively impacting them, they might, for example, get some kind of personal, emotional, psychological comfort, perhaps from the act of prayer, right? But that wouldn't mean that the prayer was actually, reaching a God who was, working it into his schedule to, okay, well, I will see between 5:30 and 6, I will deal with this man's depression. Now, but it is an act of perhaps, something that person is doing just to comfort themselves and feel better. That's fine, but that's really what it is. Real problems need direct, real, hands-on solutions, and I don't see the simple act of accepting belief in a deity as something that would solve or address much of anything. That's just my perspective as an unbeliever.
Cool. Thank you. And Caleb, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I just want to address like a problem I kind of have with people. When people turn to God, I feel like it takes out some of the credit that they themselves deserve, because I feel like they're the ones that pulled themselves out of that dark situation. And so giving all the credit to God, I don't know, I just don't think it really helps them in the end. I feel like, they did it themselves, and so that's my main problem. I don't necessarily God exactly help them. I just think they use that. If you know what I mean.
Cool.
Yeah, I know what she's saying. There are, not to put in, but I mean there are.
Please.
For example, one objection that we on the show have, and Matt Dillahunty in particular, our main host, has spoken a great deal about this. 12-step programs for recovery and abuse, of alcohol or drug abuse, that kinds of things. The ones that take a specific religious stance always sort of start from a premise that I think puts the person at a disadvantage right away, and it's exactly what Kayla spoke of. This whole idea of I am powerless, and I therefore need to draw power in from some sort of external source above me. And immediately, I think that right away that's something that recapitulates low self-esteem or the way in which those people feel very negatively about themselves. And I don't see that that's being a helpful thing to tell someone who has an immediate problem. Why, yes, as a matter of fact, you really are a complete failure who can't deal with your circumstance. It incorporates a form of victim blaming right into the core of whatever treatment they're trying to provide. Whereas, really, what's going on is if the person who suffers from something like addiction is given the tools to say, yes, something is happening to me. I'm embroiled in something, but I can do better than this. I can apply myself. I can sort of wrestle with my own demons and deal with it. Well, you find, in fact, that you not to say that you won't need help. We all sometimes need help in our lives, but we should get that help from a standpoint of, but I can do it, and I deserve it, and whatever help I get, I appreciate. But at the end, it's my fight, and I have to fight it.
Isn't it true that, though, a lot of your circumstances are not within your control? There's a lot of things, even the ability to be able to overcome these things, the abilities that you're born with, the circumstances you find yourself in, these things are not, things that you can impact. And sometimes, would you hold the same criticism for someone who is something, but also thanks God that they were given the tools that allowed them to be able to do that?
Okay, I got a little lag in the midst of your last sentence there, but I think I know what you were asking. Like I said earlier, the example that I gave of a believer who is perhaps going through a circumstance like this, and part of whatever therapy that they are going through to deal with their problem involves, they pray for deliverance and guidance and what have you. I do understand that is something that provides them with a much-needed sense of emotional comfort. So I can't blame them for that, and it's certainly, I would not be the person who, if it was somebody in the middle of a situation, attempt to be like that's not the time. You don't proselytize to someone, whether it's theism or atheism, when they're in the midst of a crisis. You try to help them practically. So I wouldn't say, hey, what are you doing praying? You're wasting your time. You need to be doing this and that and the other thing instead. I mean, I would certainly encourage them. I would help them find whatever solutions that I felt really could impact them, materially and directly, and provide a real solution. I do, but in terms of the believer who goes through something and comes out the other side and thanks God, I would have to agree with Kayla. I would say, for one thing, give yourself some credit here, and for another thing, it troubles me, and I think a lot of atheists in general, when for example, someone goes through 30 hours of heart surgery and they come out the other end, and they're the first person they think is God. Well, what about all of those surgeons who struggled to save your life? That's who we think really should get the credit for. I know a believer would say, but God guided the surgeon's hands. Okay, fine, if you believe that, but give credit where it really is due. Whatever your belief says to you that that allows you to feel comfort and safety while you were going through your crisis, just acknowledge the real help that you're getting, and acknowledge the real help that you're giving yourself. There's no harm in that. In fact, I think it's healthy.
Kyle, what do you think of all this? And by the way, feel free, to respond to each other. You don't have to wait for me to. But yeah, Kyle, what do you think?
Okay, on the topic, I agree with what you say, that people do need to be able to take a degree of credit for their efforts, and also thanking surgeons, things like that. I don't really feel like that's a problem with religion necessarily itself, as much as it is a failure on the individual to recognize they need to thank someone when they help them. In Scripture, the Bible talks about plowing your land, but God sends the rain. So if someone is out working for you, you still should thank them for the help they gave you, but you still recognize that God ultimately gave the rain. So in a case of like a surgeon, you should definitely thank your heart surgeon very much, but that doesn't mean you can't also thank God as well with that. Now, on the topic of recommending a religion to someone, personally, at least from what I've seen myself, religion will sometimes give people, as far as the structures go, different denominations, will sometimes give people a boost of comfort, but in the long run, they're still going to have the systematic problems they had. Now, at least for me, when I actually did come to know God myself and to know who Christ was, I didn't magically have all my problems disappear, and it took a very long time before I did really see any improvement with that. So I personally wouldn't ever recommend religious belief as a band-aid to make your problems go away. For me, at least with my religious beliefs, it's a long-term thing. It has to do with where you'll be after you die, and the focus for right here and now is a bonus, but it shouldn't really be the focus. And that's pretty much all I have right now.
Ooh, does anyone else have anything to respond to that? Or?
I'm inclined to agree. I think anybody who tells you that if you turn to God and God will magically solve all your problems, I think that person is worthy of suspicion. I think any problems that we have, I'm not a big fan of the 12-step programs either. I think any problems that we have, if they're psychological problems or emotional problems, then I think it, your faith and practical approaches need to walk hand in hand. I think some people would send you to some churches would send you to a Christian counselor. I would be uncomfortable doing that unless I knew the Christian counselor personally, because frankly some Christian counselors are really terrible. I would be just as happy sending them to a licensed secular counselor, and then providing them pastoral support as well. And in fact, that's what we're encouraged to do. So I think it's important to be practical in solving your problems and not expect God to solve every little problem that you come across. But I think it's also worth noting, like Kala was saying, with the God sends the rain. I believe God gives people talent. So God gave the surgeons who did your 30-hour heart surgery, the talents that they have. And so absolutely thank the surgeons, but thank God for providing them with the talents, or for, you know, sending the rain that is medical science and such. So I think you need to take a balanced approach if you're taking a faith-based approach to healing.
Okay, I have something to add to that. To me, it's kind of strange that it's like God wins either way. If he doesn't send something to help you, then that's because it was his will. But if he does send something to you, then he saved you. So it's not really fair to do that, because half the time it's not going to happen, half the time it is going to happen. And that's another issue I have with people using their own personal experience to try and promote God, because it's like there's so many Christians in the United States, and there's such a large percentage that don't get the help, don't get through it, and they just never get through it. You know, so it's like you're not seeing the other side of it. You're wearing rose-colored glasses, thinking that God's going to make everything better, when there are people who are praying to him that it's not happening. So that's my input for that.
Cool, and that kind of leads us into.
I was just gonna
Please,
very briefly just to follow up on what Kayla said. Yeah, well, one thing that I do think many believers don't really recognize. We got a call on the television show one year addressing this very question. You know, a very nice young lady asked about, you know, for example, if you had, you know, they had a relative, or she had a relative who had been cured, or had her cancer go into remission, and she credited God for this, or didn't maybe necessarily credit God for this, but at least felt that God was part of the process, felt that God, you know, watched over the thing and sent, you know, whatever, you know, contributed to the healing in some way, and she gave this as an example of seeing, you know, God's effect in her life, and essentially what I responded with was, I certainly understand that is how believers think, but you have to understand that there are all the mothers out there in hospitals, in cancer hospitals, who die of the cancer, or mothers or children or what have you. It then opens up, I think, the very uncomfortable theological question of, you know, are you really saying that you think God loved your mom better than that other person's mom who didn't survive? And I don't think that, and certainly they're in their own hearts they wouldn't think that. But I think that it's simply this is one of those situations where I think what Kayla's talking about is that when you have favorable things happen in your life and you add God to the list, your Oscar thank you list, right, of all those, you know, all the people that you're thanking for your success, you are opening yourself, you're personalizing it to such an extent that you don't see, for example, strife that other people don't overcome. And then what's the question there? Did they just not pray hard enough? Did they just not have enough faith? You know, because it's hard to really imagine a loving God who, you know, allows child A to die, but child A to survive, but B, C, D, and E not to, or mother A to go into cancer remission, but mother B, C, D, and E to, you know, to pass away from the condition. So again, understanding the personal comfort that believers get from a feeling that, again, God is sending the rain. You know, on our side, we're like, yeah, but isn't it, you know, why does God only let it rain on your block when there's drought over here and there and there? And so that's our response. We usually, when we hear, you know, believers do this sort of thing, and you know.
Yeah. Well, can I respond to that? Annie, you haven't had a chance to speak. Would you like to speak? Is Annie here? I guess he's not here.
Oh, no, I'm here. I'm here.
Okay.
But I just...
Did you have something you wanted to say to that, or can I go?
Oh, you can go.
Okay. Well, you know, I'm Presbyterian, so I come out of the Reformed tradition. And the cornerstone of the Reformed tradition is the sovereignty of God. and the idea that God takes the long view of things. And you know, one of my favorite stories in the Bible is the story of Joseph, who for those of you that don't know, and I'm sure you all know it, his brothers beat the crap out of him and throw him in a well, and then he gets sold into slavery. Well, then he goes to Egypt, and he rises up the ranks in Egypt, and then he saves Egypt and his family. And there's this wonderful line at the end that says, "You intended evil, but God used it for good." And so I think it's easy, and I don't want this to sound callous, because it's not intended that way. But it's easy for us to you know, when your mother or your father dies from cancer, which is terrible and heartbreaking. It's easy for us to be short-sighted, but as Christians, we're open to the belief that good will come of this, that God turns all things evil eventually towards good. And so maybe this doesn't answer your objection that God gets credit either way. And if not, then I don't know what
No,
to
I
tell
mean,
you.
it's actually, the points you bring up actually open up an entirely new tangent of the conversation. I'm going to let other people respond, though, because I do have responses to that. But, you know, not wanting to dominate the conversation, I don't think I'll let, you know, if you're done, other folks talk before. But I don't think it's something that opens, that answer opens a new tangent.
That's why I brought it up.
A new fork in the road, yeah. Anyone?
I had something and then I completely forgot what it was.
That's why I have a notepad and a pen next to me.
Yeah, I know, I really okay, wait. The subject was the bad things. Oh, right. Personally, I feel like we need to recognize there's also evil in the world. I do believe in a literal Satan going around and doing things. So I don't personally really know what's going on all the time. Oh, sorry, no, I remember what I was going to say. What Kayla was talking about earlier, I'm sorry, I'm jumping subject. There's something called the population of events that would appear coincidental. So if you really look at statistically, something coincidental, something that seems miraculous, is probably going to happen if given a large enough time span, especially when you start allowing for leeway, like it was kind of like a miracle, things like that. So I don't personally feel like giving God credit should really be proof for somebody else. When you see a miracle, that's something personal in your own life. It shouldn't really be always used as evidence to convince somebody else that God exists, because in all honesty, what I've seen in my life that I know God did, I really don't think would ever convince an atheist, and I don't expect it to. And I feel like a lot of the times we have problems because believers try to use a miracle that was personal, intended for them, is proof for somebody else that it wasn't actually intended to prove anything to. So I do feel like, well, yeah, you're saying God's going to get credit for the good things and not the bad, but that should be on a personal basis for someone that knows God, not being used to prove something to somebody else. Because statistically, some weird-looking things are going to happen eventually, so it's not really going to convince anyone. I don't really think, personally.
Let me ask you something in response to that, because it's interesting. You know, everyone believes what they believe for reasons. You know, you believe that something is true because you have been convinced that it's true. You have, you know, whatever evidence, whatever it was that you considered convincing evidence, that is what allowed you to embrace the belief. So the idea that, I find it very curious, the idea that a God would present an individual with a circumstance that was, for example, a personal miracle. And this allows that believer to say, yes, I know God, I'm fully convinced this particular event you know, is something that is sufficient evidence for me to, A, believe there's a God, that he works miracles in our lives, and so on and so forth. And yet, there's nothing about this that can be used as evidence to convince another person. And if the whole idea, particularly in the Christian tradition, is that God wants our belief in him, he wants our worship, wouldn't it make sense for such a God to, yes, to provide you, for example, with the tools to say, here is what happened in my life, here is how it convinced me, and now let me just present this to you. And if it's sound, it should be sufficient to convince the other person, or to at least get the other person thinking, all right, well, that is at least some credible evidence that I could work from. The idea that you would receive a miracle in your life, but there's nothing about it that you could use, in an evidentiary sense. If you wanted to talk to an unbeliever and say, okay, well, here is what I will lay out for you as evidence for God, but that can't be one of them. I just find that puzzling as to why that would be.
Okay, honestly, I find that puzzling too when I was an atheist. I kind of asked the same questions. God wants to have a personal relationship with you. He wants to get to know you personally. And the thing about that is everyone is different. Some people simply don't have the mental capability to understand some of the things you do. And so God meets people that are at that place in a way they can personally understand. I never actually had any evidence. Now, when I came to know God, I remember I was washing my face, and I realized I had already been talking to him for about 3 days. So I never actually had an aha moment, this is a proof that he exists. So I didn't have a personal miracle. There wasn't some proof that suddenly came into my life. Now, other people have come to their beliefs through different ways, and that's okay with me. But I never personally got the argument I was looking for when I was an atheist, and I had asked that same question before. So I don't really feel like when I said that it's a personal miracle, what I mean is I've already established I know who God is, and I know what his hand looks like in my life. So for me, when I'm seeing a personal miracle, it's based on someone I already know. But that's not something that God used for me personally to establish a belief in him. He used the Holy Spirit. John 6:44 says, "No one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws them to me, and I will raise them up at the last." So you can't argue your way to God. And that frustrated me very much as an atheist. I felt like that was a cop-out, but I didn't even really think I'd ever become Christian, and I ended up. So that's kind of how I feel about that.
I would like to lead into a topic that's kind of related to this, but first, if it's okay, I'd like to make a point about prayer that should be fast. Soren Kierkegaard once said something like, I haven't looked up the quote, but prayer is not, for God or to impact other things. It's to change the nature of the one who prays. I think that prayer for Christians is largely centered around building the relationship through, some form of communication. I think humans are social animals. I think that we benefit through communication with the divine, and I think that that's the primary purpose of prayer. I want to say Ephesians 6. There's this passage about resisting, spiritual warfare, and it lists a bunch of stuff that sounds like video game items, the shield of faith and blah blah blah. And at the end, it positions the command to pray for all kinds of things in the context of spiritual warfare. I think it is beneficial to us. If anyone would like to respond to that, they can, and if not, then we'll move on into the discussion that you guys were talking about a minute ago and a better topic.
I wouldn't mind responding to that. I think prayer is a lot like keeping a diary. It's very calming and almost meditative when you do it, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're actually communicating with anyone other than yourself.
Cool. Well, the idea that you communicate with the divine is kind of neat. I obviously believe that you are.
Well, it's it's been said many times that a belief in a deity, a belief in a personal deity, particularly because not every religion has the idea of a personal deity behind it. But the belief in a personal deity is simply an offshoot of, again, we grow up with parents who look after us, and it's an ability as an adult when we are no longer under the protection of our parents and we're out in the cold, cruel world by ourselves. This allows us a parent figure to believe, that we have such a figure who is still loving us and watching over us and what have you. And particularly as we get older and then our parents age and they die, and of course now, even so, now that we're literally without parents, again, to believe that we have that loving Father, the language that Christians use of our Heavenly Father. It's very much the familial relationship that is indicated in the language that's used in the way Christians, interact with God. So I think that's probably just a lot of it. And so again, you're still, maybe you're not necessarily talking to yourself, but you're still, you're talking to mom and dad, so to speak, whom you miss, and you still, and who protected you when you were a child. And I think a lot of it psychologically is probably simply an offshoot of that.
I'm gonna hit you with a thought that I've always had. It is one of my most deeply held beliefs that all humans are fundamentally good to some extent, and I believe that if you truly and thoroughly know another person, be they human or a person from some other planet or whatever, you will necessarily love them. I just think that's how it works. So when I talk about a personal God, for me it's like if we accept, first off, and this is obviously a hard trick getting here, if we accept that there is a God, and we accept that he is all-knowing or close enough to all-knowing that he knows us, to the extent that we perceive him as knowing us, I guess I believe he would necessarily care. I think it's really hard to experience in that kind of internal, close way that an all-knowing being would, the suffering that people go through, and not care. Does that make sense?
Well, again, it is this. No, I think we're just going to plunge with both feet into the problem of evil, I guess, at this point. We don't have to if you don't want to, but it's.
I would love to.
Yeah, we could. I'd be happy to too if you like. The idea that if it's true, let me phrase it this way: if it is true that there is indeed one God watching all over us all, and so in other words, the premise of the Christian or the Abrahamic faiths is the correct one. That we do have a personal God. He wants a relationship with us on a personal level. Again, it still seems, without the whole idea of, but of course this God does not want to twist our arms, right? So he wants us to come to him in our own way. With all of these premises at work, it is still fascinating that where there are cases of definite horror and strife in the world, whether you're looking at a famine-plagued culture in some developing nation, or if you're looking at tribal or sectarian warfare in some other area, again, where the body count of innocents is very, very high. The idea that if people are fundamentally good, why does it seem easier for those of us, for example, in the comfortable West, where we aren't having to deal with the struggles and strifes of those people? We're brushing our teeth, or we're in the bathroom talking to ourselves, and suddenly we realize all this time we've been talking about God. We are in our comfortable, very privileged, very safe lives in the West without war plaguing us, and without disease and famine. Maybe economic hardship, but at the end of the day, we have the ability to advance. We generally are in a greater position of comfort than others. Why is it that it's so easy for those of us in that climate to say, God has a personal relationship with me, and yet we see all these other people. So why is it so hard for God to reach those people if he is all-knowing, if he is all-powerful? Why is it necessary to send missions and churches out when God, again, should presumably just have the ability to talk one-on-one to each of us and to see what it is that's going on in our lives and in our hearts that's hurting us, and provide us with those solutions. It just the inequity of fairness and goodness in the world, that there is so much actual evil in the world. Although I don't believe it's supernatural. I believe it's all too. I believe in the banality of evil, that it's all too human. I think that if God can help a person in the West, find him and have that relationship with him and have that impact on his life that brings him the security and comfort, why should it be so much harder in these less developed countries, in these less fortunate countries, less privileged countries, in areas of the world where real strife is going on, and you would think that they're in much greater need.
Would it be okay if I got to that?
Please. Yes, please.
Okay. When I was a kid, my dad was an appliance serviceman, and he used to take me with him. And he'd let me hold his trouble light, get his tools, and things like that. And the key factor is I didn't actually speed up his job. I didn't make it easier for him. He took me along because I was his son, and he wanted to spend time with me. And looking back on it, I love the time that I can look back I spent with my dad. So with evangelism and spreading the gospel, God doesn't actually need us to go to a third world country. He chooses to let us join him in what he's doing, which is saving people. I've been to Mexico about 3 times over the last 3 years, and what I've personally seen, they're a lot worse off than we are. I mean, Mexico's better off than a lot of other places, but the areas I've been, they're actually usually more open to the gospel than places around here. And a lot of other missionaries I've talked to in places that are destitute, they're usually more open to these things than people in first world countries and people that are more well off. So I haven't personally noticed that it's easier for people in wealthy nations to come to know God, because it seems, at least to me, it's easier to talk to people about these things that are more open to about it when they are destitute.
But isn't it the case that over, I believe, 85% of the U.S. population identify as Christian? I mean, so God has, again, if He's real, He's reached a lot of people here. In a culture where the majority of us are well off, and even those of us who aren't well off are certainly more well off than the standard of poverty is still better than it is in the developed nations that or in Mexico or in areas where you would think.
Well, Christianity is really blossoming in China and Ghana actually, and so I think really the big reason that Christianity has such a large presence in America is because culturally we're Christian, and countries that are not culturally Christian, even countries where there's oppression and destitution, Christianity is still growing very quickly. In the early history of the church, Christianity grew among the slaves and among the poor. It wasn't until Constantine really that Christianity became something that rich people even really considered. And going back to another point that you made before, I think it's important to point out that God, to say that God is a personal God is not to say that God is only concerned with each individual. God, the greater witness of Scripture shows that God is concerned with the bigger picture. God is concerned with communities. God is concerned with nations. God is concerned with humanity in general. And I think individual Christians have experiences with the Holy Spirit, but I think it's a misrepresentation of what we mean by saying a personal God, to say that God only cares about the individual or God only works on individual levels.
Yeah, but then doesn't that mean that? Do you think then that the Christians who do say my relationship with God is personal and they pray to God for personal reasons, to ask for help and relief for personal issues, do you think that they're in error doing that, or do they just need to realize when they are praying to God for those things that you're going to be a bit down on His list of priorities? What exactly is the implication of that? We say that you have an entire community of Christians who do believe that they have a personal relationship with God, that He is their Father, but then at the same time, I hear that, but God's greater concern is with the bigger picture, communities, nations, peoples as a population. How would you, to another believer who wants God's personal intervention in his life, how do you address that with them?
I think the mutation of Christianity that has taken hold in America, American Christianity, where people pray to God so that they can win the lottery, or you know, they think that the fact that
But it doesn't
the
even have to
light
be,
well, but
it doesn't even have to be that selfish. It could just be
right,
like,
I know. I'm just using broader. Right. But I think that is born out of America's obsession with individuality, and I think much of America has lost sight of the communal nature of humanity, and so I think such fiercely personal relationships with God, yes, I think those are an error, because I think it's a distortion of humanity, it's a distortion of God's focus. So I would say to the Christian who thinks that Christianity is it's only about me and God, I would say they are in error, and I would say that now, I'm not going to discount personal miracles, or because I don't have the miracle thing figured out yet. It's this weird, you know, in Doctor Who, it's wibbly wobbly, timey wimey. It's whatever the miracle version of that is. But I think the I think the American expression of Christianity that is so fiercely personal is an error. Yes, I would say that.
Right. Okay, interesting.
Okay, I feel like it's a mix of both. I mean, our president right now, Barack Obama, he has daughters, and he has to have the concerns of the country in mind. Oh, sure.
Wait, am I lagging right now? My internet is bad. Sorry, Kyle, you keep doing your thing. If you heard me interrupt you, it's because I thought I was speaking before you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you're lagging.
Yeah, I'm getting some.
My apologies. Let me know whenever there's an opening, and I'll try and jump in, and hopefully it won't lag.
I'll try to make this quick. Basically, what I'm getting at, it's personal relationship with God, like between a child and their parents. So if your parent's the president, it's not necessarily wrong for a kid to ask for something kind of selfish. Now, a kid shouldn't be getting greedy with their parents either. Now, in the case of your dad's the president, you can't really expect him to compromise national security over a personal request, but at the same time, he is still your dad. That doesn't mean you can't ever have a personal request. So I do feel people can turn God into their personal wish machine or something, and I do feel that's missing the point of things. But I also don't want to tell somebody it's inherently wrong to bring their personal concerns to God, too.
Yeah. Well, I asked this because, you know, I find, you know, these are interesting answers because there is something about American Christianity that is, you know, uniquely strange, I think, to pretty much anyone else in the world. And for example, this notion of the prosperity gospel that I think, you know, probably makes a lot of Christians really cringe. And I remember having a conversation, I think going way back, with a Christian friend of mine. This was when the whole Jim and Tammy Faye thing was erupting, right? And it was a big, just media sideshow. You know, heat up the popcorn and watch. You know, but and of course, she, as you know, I guess what you would call just a rank and file everyday Christian, was you know naturally just disgusted by these people. And I just asked her, and this was back in the day when I wasn't necessarily I knew that I didn't really accept religion anymore, but I wasn't, you know, an informed atheist. I wasn't well read. I didn't know arguments or anything like that. But it struck me that, you know, again, the whole question that you hear, I guess, from atheists quite commonly, which is, why does God let X happen? This sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, she said, and I said, well, what do you think? I mean, I wanted to sound her out. What do you really think about all of this upheaval going on in the evangelical community at the moment, and particularly with TV evangelists and media evangelists? And she just sort of shrugged, and she said, you know, well, maybe God's just cleaning house. And I thought, well, that's a curious notion, okay? Because for one thing, you know, if I'm an all-knowing being, right, and you know, I would probably I'd be able, you know, I think I've got you guys figured out here, Jim and Tammy Faye. You're not doing this for me. And in fact, I know in about 3 weeks, let's see, you're going to sleep with your secretary, and you're going to do this, and you're going to do that. It's like, why did I let you guys even get started on this? Why didn't I put a little? I mean, if any fragment of you, if at any point you ever started as a Christian where your belief in me was a sincere thing, why not just ring that little bell of, hey, shouldn't you not be doing this? I mean, just have a little stroke of conscience here. Are you really doing my work, or is this all about you? I mean, it seems that God could have possibly not, because what did that do for a great many years? It made the entire church, or it made people's perceptions of Christianity look like a complete laughingstock, and certainly this can't be good for a deity that wants the embrace of the world, right? Who wants to know that he is a real deity and has love for them and wants the best for them and all of that. So it's not even that God allows strife to happen in other parts of the world, that there's a war and famine and disease and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's that even among his own church, all of this, some scandals are happening, whether it's the financial and the sex scandals of American TV evangelists, prosperity gospel fundamentalists, or if you have the Roman Catholic Church on its end with its pedophile priests, that's been a big one. This cannot be a thing that God sits back and lets all of this stuff happen within his own church. And then when these, for example, like all the priest scandal arises with the child abuse, the result is that people are going to, I think, quite naturally say, well, there you go. There you see that the church is corrupt and it's horrible and it's not doing anyone any good, and all these children are being hurt and victimized. It's been going on for years. So naturally, you're going to have a mistrust of the organization. And it cannot be to God's benefit to have the organizations that are here on earth publicly representing him and in the public eye be seen as these evil, corrupt organizations, and where all this criminal activity is happening behind the scenes. How is any of this? I would wonder why God wasn't stopping that, or at least having some sort of influence upon that before. Or what about the poor famine? Because that seems to me to be something that really would hurt acceptance of him. Don't you think?
Or you can go, Kyle. Wait, who's next? Who's the other person? Okay, I guess I'll just talk real quick. I think that goes back to the idea that God wins either way, because people will look at that corruption, and as soon as they're exposed, they're going to be like, oh, well, God meant for them to be exposed. He meant to expose the real people who aren't following him. So it's just like kind of that.
But the molestation of thousands of children had to happen first. Yeah.
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 Yeah. It's just like you can make up any kind of excuse for God and it'll be okay.
Mm-hmm. It's like, the whole, with my friend with the whole Jim and Tammy thing, God's cleaning house. Yes, but all of these people, all of these, folks at home sending Jim and Tammy fee money, they had to be financially victimized first. Then God cleaned house. Shouldn't the order have been the other way around? I'm sure that these are very, Christians probably, listen to questions like this from our side, and then you kind of shake our head. There's something perhaps fundamentally that we're not getting. But I'd like to know. I mean, we ask these questions because we really do want to know how believers think about these issues and how you reconcile them.
Can I explain how I think of these issues?
By all means.
Okay. Here's kind of how I feel about it. Just first off, one of the things that makes most sense to me is if we're dealing with an infinite God, then starting off any discussion about the ethicalness of anything that he does or trying to guess what his motivation is seems ultimately to me to be futile and impossible. I think that ultimately we are using relatively infinitely small amounts of information and ability to judge something that is impossible and beyond our understanding. That said, I'm going to leap into what I believe is kind of an absurd thing and make one point, which is I do believe that God cares about us as individuals, but I also agree that he's playing for the long game, and for me, I think if God is eternal, then relative to his eternity, Our lives, which are at best 80 years, are infinitely small, and the difference between a 30-year-old who dies and an 80-year-old who dies isn't really very big. And so I guess I feel like if there is an afterlife, and if there is a God who is eternal, then to him, this life must look like, a tiny little pinprick followed by an infinite afterlife, for better or for worse. And I guess I feel like, the idea that it is the right thing to do for God to step in here rather than playing for the long afterlife eternity seems to me to be kind of a ridiculous thing.
Well, here's why I disagree with that.
Okay.
I would think that this compassionate God would recognize that although his time frame is infinite, he would understand that as mortal beings, our time frame is not infinite, and he would have empathy and understanding for the fact that while it might not matter in the big picture on a universal scale or certainly on the infinite scale, the sexual assault of a child by a priest at that moment to that child is the worst hell that could possibly be endured. And so for a victim that innocent to be undergoing that deeply unjust and evil a form of victimization, in that moment the event is occurring, okay? It shouldn't matter if your time frame is infinite. If you have the least heart and the least compassion and and you are genuinely someone who loves and wants the best for us, you have to understand that whether or not this infinity of an afterlife exists after our brief mortal existence, God would understand that He has started us out with this brief mortal existence first, and in this brief mortal existence, we still experience not only joy but great pain and horror, and at that moment, it matters. And I would think that would be how God, a truly compassionate, loving God, would see things that way. He would know the difference. And even in the context of his infinite scale of understanding, he would recognize this flash of finite time that this mortal child is going through, or this mortal victim of anything else is going through.
But what if, so in ethics, there's kind of this sense of overridingness. Like if I told you that I use this example a lot, like if I told you that I had killed Charles, you'd say it was bad, but if I told you I killed Charles because he was, going to kill somebody else or whatever, then suddenly it's, not such a bad thing. And I guess I feel like with our limited information, again, this could be, it is possible, logically, theoretically possible, that God is allowing that child to go through that because he knows somehow that it's going to have a positive impact on his eternal afterlife. And if we use that rationale, it's a bit more like allowing a baby to get a shot so that it can live a longer and more fulfilling life, because you're allowing it to go through pain, which is, for the baby, completely agonizing and beyond anything it's ever experienced. But there is something that that the baby does not know about how the shot is ultimately going to help it. And for various reasons, which, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
And I was just going to say, again, it's a bit astonishing to sort of hear this. Not merely the comparison of a vaccination to rape, but I'm just finding it again. See, here's the problem. You give this explanation, and then I respond by saying, in what possible way could the sexual assault of a child do anything beneficial for the long-term plans or agenda of an infinite God? What could that be? How could anything like that possibly be necessary for the fulfillment of that? I'm sure, would respond by saying, well, now, again, God's infinite nature means that our understanding is limited. And to me, this sounds like rationalization. It simply sounds like, you understand. All of you who the Christians on this panel understand yourselves, the profound evil of the particular crime I'm using as an example. But you have to find a way to reconcile that morally with your image of God. But to say that, well, God, this is getting back to William Lane Craig, where he says God has a morally sufficient reason, we simply don't understand it. Well, what's the difference between a morally sufficient reason that we can't understand and no morally sufficient reason?
The difference is that in one case there's a morally sufficient reason, which to me is a really big difference. However,
But
no,
again, if we can't identify it, and if we can't,
from our perspective, I definitely see why it comes across as a cop-out and kind of hokey, but I'll point out that unlike Craig, I haven't made the point that God does have one. I made the point that it is logically possible that a God could exist who did have one.
But then you're saying that you don't actually, even though you're intellectually you're understanding that that's an option.
Oh yes,
my
point is that
personally agree with it.
Yeah, my problem is that the problem of evil is not a knockdown rebuttal. My argument, I think it's convincing. I think it's a good argument to bring up, but I do not think that it is a disproof. Does that make sense?
Well, I certainly agree with the idea that God should just be some sort of a vending machine for niceness whenever we need it, and some kind of celestial Santa. Which is a common rebuttal to the problem of evil, and I actually think that's actually reasonable, right? You wouldn't expect God to just be giving you nice things all the time and making your life a completely smooth, or any more than a parent would be able to do that. All a parent can do is guide you. So I think that would be a fair response. But when you take something, and again, remember the context of all of this. We have an incredibly horrible crime, probably the most horrible that any of us could think of. And we actually have it happening within the environment of, what the biggest, richest church in the world, right? The church whose business it is, and I understand that Protestants don't agree with Catholic doctrine and vice versa. And then I've encountered, although I don't know that it's necessarily, I know that there are some Protestants who don't think Catholics are Christian at all. That's an entirely different discussion. But suffice it to say that this is the most probably important globally, Christian church in the world in terms of its impact, in terms of its historical impact, and in terms of being seen as, a religious authority. So when you have something like these crimes happening within the context of that organization and that culture, that's going to be something that will not necessarily reflect badly on the organization, but the belief as a whole. It is going to be something that I think will reasonably sow doubt in the minds of people as to whether or not we should believe in this God who supposedly looks after us. And I'm just trying to make it understood how hollow it sounds to say, well, yes, but it's tragic that these children were raped, but God has a plan, and that in the afterlife, or there's some sort of appeal to an afterlife, a justice in an afterlife, whose existence we all admit that we can't really prove, right?
I would like to point out, or I guess present an alternate way of looking at things. There is a fairly recent strain of theology called process theology, which is something that has influenced me, even though it doesn't necessarily mesh well with the Reformed tradition. So again, wibbly wobbly, timey wimey, but I'm presenting this as an alternative. So process theology effectively discards many of what we think of as the classical attributes of God: omnipotence, omnipresence, omniscience, and I think there's merit to that, because most of that has more of its root in ancient Greek philosophy than it does in the Bible. But that's a side issue. But there are two major points. I guess there are two major points that process theology kind of ties together to deal with the problem of evil, and that is, first of all, that God is not a cosmic enforcer of rules. And I wish I have a book on process theology, but it's in my office. But the idea is God is not this totalitarian force that either forces us to behave morally or punishes us when we do. God uses, I guess you could say, persuasion, But that's highly inaccurate, and please don't take my word at that. I haven't read the book in like a while. But the second part to that is that process theology is panentheistic by nature, which takes very seriously that God is both immanent and transcendent. But the immanent part of that means that when we suffer, God suffers with us. And so when we see this horrible, terrible act of a child being raped, it's not something that God looks upon disapprovingly. It causes God to suffer just as much as that child. And so it's a relational thing, because in process theology we influence God just as much as God influences us, and so it's kind of this fluid give and take between the God and the world. And while it's not something I entirely buy into quite yet, because I don't have it all worked out and I never finished the book, but it's something worth considering, and it's something that I really do find intriguing, particularly the panentheistic portion of that theology.
Yeah. Well, I have some objections to some of the explanations that you offered, but I want to hear from some other folks.
Okay, I guess I'll talk a little. I don't buy the idea that God's not like a totalitarian. I mean, he is like the law of the land. He says that he's the beginning and he's the end. So I just like any stuff outside of that is just like, it's like they're just making up stuff to try to explain holes in their argument. If you're a Christian, the Bible is what you should base everything on, and if you start making up stuff outside of that, it's like you're just making it up.
But process theology is not necessarily non-biblical. It just abandons the Greek philosophical premises that are so culturally ingrained. Process theologians can go to the Bible and say, here, and here supports what I'm saying.
I feel like anybody can do that, though, and say this, like...
It's cold comfort to try to tell the victim of sexual assault that God is hurting just as much as you are. I mean, to the believer who is horrified by something that they have heard of but they didn't experience personally, I understand that it does trouble you, to say it is an idea worth exploring, why this sort of thing was allowed to happen. But if you approach the actual victim and you say to the victim, well, God is suffering just as much as you are as a result of what happened to you. Don't be surprised when they throw something at you. Just saying.
I got to wrap up pretty quickly, so let's make kind of final statements, if that's okay.
I want to hear from Annie. I haven't heard from him all night.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, I just wanted to point out that it doesn't necessarily require process theology. You could talk about the crucifixion of Jesus and how he had to suffer the wrath of God and have all the sin blamed on him, and that seems to me like the most suffering any human can endure, and I mean way more than we can imagine. So I don't see what exactly your point was in saying that. Would it be that wouldn't work in some sort of theodicy? If you want to respond to that.
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, theodicy has been, I think, a very highly motivated aspect of theology. Dealing with the problem of evil. A response that atheists generally have to the idea of substitutionary atonement and that sort of thing. A lot of us just simply wonder why, if Jesus was God, Jesus came down. Jesus was God on human form on the earth. So, he was the Son of God. But again, it's, if you take the idea of the Christian Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, all of one. So Jesus wasn't, a man who was chosen by God to suffer the sins of humankind, and take all that upon himself and thus cleanse us. He was God himself, came down to the earth in human form and took that role upon himself. Which again just seems very, very strange. It seems like an unduly complicated process to undergo something that, if the ultimate goal is to have a reason to forgive mankind for whatever sinful nature God decided we needed this redemption for. Again, God could have just said, humanity, I forgive you, right? And it wouldn't have required everything that this whole blood sacrifice attitude. That's right. Again, and if you take that, God looks at the big picture and the infinity of everything. If he could look down at us mortal beings and say, something, what you've done is so small compared to me and the grandeur of existence as a whole and everything that I have created. I forgive you. Let's move on.
Well, I mean,
can I get to that one?
Well,
Please.
I mean,
hello,
part of that is sorry to say this, but it's sort of a red herring, because the topic was the theodicy. Now, if you want to ask why God couldn't just forgive, you would have to look at the nature of God and what you would have to look at his character and his omni-goodness and his need for just punishment for sin. Exactly. So, but I just don't see how this is quite relevant to
Well, yeah,
the
I mean,
problem
these
of evil.
I guess these conversations tend to
I have a.
split off in forks, but
Yeah, I actually have to wrap it up right now, but you guys can stay in the chat and continue discussing things. But Martin, you're a special guest, so if you want to make a closing remark, or if everyone wants to make a closing remark, that's cool. And then
I'll just briefly say, thank you for having me on. I've very much enjoyed this conversation. It's been great. I'm going to read up now more on process theology, get myself acquainted with it. And I want to say thanks for a really interesting conversation with Kayla and then all the Christians here. It's been a great talk.
Yeah.
Thank
I hope
you.
I got your name right.
You did. Sorry that things weren't more balanced. A lot of our atheists bailed at the last minute.
That's okay.
Dirty heathens, can't trust them.
That's right. Yeah.
So, thank you for watching the debate show without a name, everybody. And we love you. Subscribe and like our page and all that good stuff. Be quiet, Charlie. Woman? Yes, that is the name of my show. My brother's in here harassing me. All right. Bye, guys.
So long.